Hello, and welcome to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Required Structural Pest Control Certification and Training Standards Update. On February 1, 2025, new structural pest control regulations were codified and became effective, requiring all North Carolina licensees and certified applicators to be competent and knowledgeable of the new EPA-required certification and training rules. All North Carolina licensees and certified applicators must complete training showing they are knowledgeable of these new rules by their next recertification date. This is the date your license/certification phase expires, not necessarily the annual renewal. This presentation, in its entirety, has been created and approved to meet the standards and training requirements of this rule. Once completed, you will be asked to submit your information to the NCDA&CS Structural Pest Control and Pesticides Division as a record to show you have completed this training. This training, viewed in its entirety, will take approximately 50 minutes to complete. In addition to educating you with the new certification and training standards, you will also receive a one-time general credit hour for your current certification period upon completion. These credits will show up on your official transcript. An example transcript can be seen on the screen. You can verify the completion of this training by viewing your course details transcript, which can be found online by searching your license number or name. You must go through and complete this training to recertify your license or certification card. This requirement must be met regardless of obtaining all of the necessary credit hours during your recertification period. No one is grandfathered in under these new rules, and you must complete this training by your next recertification date. There will be an extension made to those whose recertification period ends June 30, 2026. You will have until June 30, 2027 to complete this training. Again, the deadline to complete this training is by your next recertification date. The easiest way to find out your phase recertification date is to go to the license search function located on the Structural Pest Control section homepage. If you are unsure if you need to complete this training, email the Structural Pest Control section at structuralcredits@ncda.gov.
So, what is a pest? According to the North Carolina Structural Pest Control Law, a pest is any living organism, including but not limited to insects, rodents, birds, and fungi, which the Commissioner declares a pest. For structural pest control, that broad definition narrows to the organisms that infest, damage, contaminate, or otherwise threaten structures and the people inside them. In practice, North Carolina's structural program is organized around household pests, wood-destroying organisms, and fumigation. What are some possible goals of pest control? There are 3 possible goals, each with its own strategy. Those goals are prevention, suppression, or eradication. In the case of prevention, you are trying to prevent an infestation or incident from occurring in the first place. For example, putting a flea collar on a dog, adding a brush guard to a door, or applying termiticide to new construction. In other cases, suppression, or reducing the overall population to manageable numbers, is the goal. Placing glue boards throughout a client's facility, or perhaps fogging a heavy roach infestation to a more manageable level. Eradication is the complete destruction of something. If you want to eradicate roaches from a kitchen, you may need a variety of intensive and sustained efforts. If you want to eradicate drywood termites from a structure, you may decide to fumigate. The goal of your pest control should inform your strategy. Now that we know what a pest is, what is a pesticide? The suffix "cide" is Latin for to kill. So, a pesticide is something that kills a pest. An insecticide kills insects, an herbicide kills plants, a fungicide kills fungi, and so on. In North Carolina, a pesticide is legally defined as any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pests. You can think of pesticides as the umbrella, and all the different types of pesticide as being under the umbrella. Insect growth regulators and pheromones also meet the federal FIFRA definition. Some pesticide terms that you should know. The mode of action is how a pesticide works. For example, fipronil, an active ingredient in some termiticides, is a non-repellent that affects the pest's central nervous system. Because termites don't readily detect it, they may carry it back and spread exposure within the colony. Selectivity describes whether a treatment affects one species, a few species, or many. For example, poisons such as zinc phosphide can affect many animals that come across it, while a cockroach bait is more selective because it is intended to target specific structural pests that feed on the bait, such as ants and roaches. There are systemic and contact pesticides. Systemic products will enter the organism and be transported throughout, whereas contact products only affect the insects they physically contact. Residual activity describes the longevity of a pesticide. Will it persist for hours, weeks, months, or longer? Pesticide resistance is primarily developed through natural selection when resistant individuals survive pesticide use and pass on their traits. This process is often accelerated by repeated application of the same pesticide or chemical class. What is Integrated Pest Management, or IPM? IPM is the coordinated use of appropriate pest control tactics to reduce pests and their damage to an acceptable level. IPM uses pest monitoring, acceptable thresholds, and a variety of tactics to keep pest populations at levels with minimal impacts.
There are 4 components to an IPM program. The first, and the basis, is cultural methods. Cultural methods are techniques and strategies that help desirable organisms and hinder undesirable ones. In a restaurant, this could be good sanitation or habit changes, like shelf rotation. When identified pest populations are low, physical, mechanical control should be applied. This could be adding door guards or vacuuming. Biological controls are when the pest's natural enemy, or predator, is released into the environment. Finally, chemical control should be considered when other means of control have failed and rapid intervention is needed. Biorational pesticides are selective, often naturally derived products that target specific pests, while conventional pesticides are often synthetic and kill on contact. There are 6 overall steps to a successful IPM program. The first step of integrated pest management is identification. Without proper identification of the pest you may be dealing with, there can be no successful control strategy. The second step is to monitor. You should monitor population levels to determine a baseline. The third step is to determine the threshold level. This is the point at which the cost of inaction may be greater than the cost of action. The fourth step is to consider your options. The fifth step is to actually implement your pest management choice or choices that you think will work best. Lastly, you should evaluate your strategy based on results. A successful IPM program may require you to repeat several of these steps to reach your goal of pest management. Pesticide resistance is the ability of an insect, fungi, weed, or other pest to tolerate the pesticide that once controlled it. Pesticide resistance develops over time with the repeated use of single pesticides or modes of action. At first, a given pesticide may control all the individuals on which it is used. Over time, as genes change, there exists the possibility of genetic change that allows an individual to survive and reproduce. If the same pesticide or a pesticide with the same mode of action is used, over time an entire population can become resistant. In the United States, some German cockroach populations have become resistant to multiple insecticides, including pyrethroid sprays and certain bait products. This is primarily the result of overuse and continued reliance of the same products to manage the pest.
The label is the law. The label is the information printed on or attached to the pesticide container. The pesticide user must comply with all instructions on the label. Mandatory language in the label includes language like must, will, or required. Advisory language is sometimes included and is meant to help the user, but it is not mandatory. Statements like users should, take care to, and the applicator may are examples of advisory language. While the label itself is received from the manufacturer when purchased, labeling includes any brochures, leaflets, websites, or other information about the product. Labeling is often received from vendors and distributors as informational and is not part of the label.
The pesticide label is a legal document which provides official instructions on how to mix, apply, store, and dispose of the pesticide product. Be sure you read the label before purchasing, mixing, and applying, storing, or disposing of any pesticide or its empty containers. Not only is the label the law, but it exists to inform and guide the user. Most, if not all, questions can be answered by referencing the label.
The pesticide label components. There are 14 major components of the pesticide label. The trade name or brand name, the type and formulation, concentrate or ready to use, liquid, granular, aerosol, etc. The use classification statement, general use or restricted use. The ingredient statement, active ingredients and percent of each. The EPA registration number and EPA establishment number. The signal word, caution, warning, danger, danger poison. The statement of practical treatment, which includes first steps in case of exposure. There is also the precautionary statements, which include information regarding toxicity, irritation, and sensitization hazards. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, and equipment. Environmental hazards. Directions for use. Storage and disposal. Name and address of the manufacturer, and net contents. The precautionary statement is a very important part of the pesticide label. The personal protective equipment required for each pesticide use can be found under the precautionary statement of the label. Additional PPE may be required for mixing and loading. Remember, the label is the law, and the PPE is there to protect you. A general-use pesticide is a pesticide that can be purchased and used without a license, but the user must follow all the label directions. While a general-use pesticide can be purchased and used without a license for personal use. In North Carolina, a structural pest control license is required if the applicator is providing a service which includes the use of pesticides and is receiving compensation. Remember to follow the label instructions. Just because the pesticide is general use doesn't mean that the label can be ignored. For all pesticides, the label is the law and must be followed. A restricted-use pesticide is a pesticide that requires a license or certified applicator's card for both purchase and use. The restricted-use statement is always located in the box at the top front of the label. Generally, these products have a higher potential for harm to humans and the environment. The exact reason for a product being restricted can be found in the restricted-use statement box. For restricted-use pesticides, federal record-keeping is required.
The signal word can be caution, warning, danger, or danger poison. The signal word describes the potential for the product to harm humans. Products bearing the signal word caution are deemed to have the lowest acute toxicity to humans, while products bearing the words danger poison are the most acutely toxic. Acute toxicity refers to harm inflicted by a one-time single exposure event. The pesticide label will have a section called Storage and Disposal. The Storage and Disposal section will inform the user about proper storage, including temperature extremes, moisture, and proximity to other items, such as fertilizer, food, and feed. There will also be details on how to dispose of pesticide waste. The first means of disposal considered should be on the target site, according to the label. If this is not possible, the label will list who to contact, such as state pesticide authorities or the US EPA. Containers may be wrapped, triple rinsed, or pressure rinsed, punctured, and offered for recycling. North Carolina law prohibits the burning of pesticide containers. Some pesticide labels may require that a licensee/certified applicator be physically present at the application site. Labels may also list the requirements for supervision. For example, the excerpt of label shown on the screen is from a fumigant. This label is an example of a pesticide that requires at least 2 trained or certified people to be present during the fumigation. It is important to read the pesticide label thoroughly before applying the pesticide. Applicators must be licensed or certified in the certification category or categories appropriate to the type and site of the application. Your pesticide license/certification type and category must cover the use on the pesticide label. It is important to note that the label does not distinguish between a licensee and a certified applicator, because both are authorized to use restricted use products without direct supervision. This is an example from a pesticide label that has a statement to this effect. For example, if a licensed/certified applicator wishes to treat for drywood termites by fumigation, they must be licensed in the F phase. Each phase can be earned by passing an exam, with the applicator demonstrating that they have the appropriate knowledge for a given phase. The categories you hold can be found on the back of your structural pest control license as shown. Some labels may have product-specific notification requirements. In this case, fumigants and the posting of signs at all entrances to the fumigated areas. Other labels may have additional training requirements. Be sure to read your label to know the requirements.
There are some other pesticide labeling terms that you may encounter. 25B pesticides are minimum risk pest control products exempt from federal registration under the EPA's FIFA regulations because they use low-risk active ingredients, often essential oils, plant extracts, or common household substances, and meet specific conditions. Safety data sheets, or SDSs, are a crucial document providing detailed information about a hazardous chemical, outlining its properties, risks, and necessary safety precautions for handling, storage, and emergency response. Special local needs, SLN, and Section 18 emergency exemptions are both ways for states to allow temporary or specific pesticide uses for specific situations. SLNs address documented, ongoing needs, like a specific regional pest problem, while Section 18s are for urgent, non-routine emergency conditions, like sudden pest outbreaks, like a new pest, or public health threat, needing immediate, time-limited, unregistered use.
A pesticide formulation is a mixture of the active ingredient that controls pests, plus inert ingredients, which are carriers, solvents, stabilizers, and adjuvants such as emulsifiers and wetting agents. Inert ingredients improve handling, safety, storage, and effectiveness, creating usable products. There are several common types of pesticide formulations that we'll talk about here. The first is wettable powders. You will notice this as abbreviated as WP on a pesticide label. Wettable powder formulations reach the end user as a dry powder. When mixed with water, they form a suspension. Soluble powders, or S, are another. These dissolve readily in water, forming a true solution. The major disadvantage with soluble powders is that there is a high potential for inhalation when mixing due to the fine particles. Emulsifiable concentrates, or EC, are liquids that contain the active ingredient and inert solvents, allowing for easy mixing with water. Since they readily solubilize, they also are easily absorbed through the skin. Some additional pesticide formulations, such as water-soluble packets, or WSP, offer a closed system, that is, a pod or packet, that can easily and safely be used during mixing and loading. Ready-to-use products, abbreviated RTU, need no additional water and are completely ready to use. Granular, abbreviated G, products have the active ingredient in a dry, granular type carrier and are ready to spread. And finally, a flowable, abbreviated F, is a specific type of concentrate that must be mixed with water and requires moderate agitation in the tank.
Now let's take a look at pesticides and how they may affect the environment. The environment is everything around us: the air, the soil, water, animals, people, as well as all the manufactured components of the indoors where we live, work, and play. Pesticides are not only poisonous to the target pest, but they can be toxic to people, animals, and our environment. Always check the label for environmental effects, such as contamination of groundwater or toxicity to birds, bees, fish, or other wildlife. When using pesticides, you should ask these two questions. Where will the pesticide go in the environment after it is applied? What damage could the pesticide possibly do to non-target sites that it may reach in the environment? How do pesticides move in the environment? There are two main ways that pesticides move in the environment. The first is by air. The airborne movement of pesticides away from the target site is called drift. Drift could be the movement of pesticide vapor or particles, either through wind or temperature volatilization. Applications made inside structures are especially prone to be moved by ventilation systems and forced air heating and cooling systems. Another thing to be aware of is temperature inversions. Temperature inversions occur when cool, dense air gets trapped near the ground by a layer of warmer air, acting like a lid that prevents vertical mixing and causes fine spray droplets to drift long distances off target, potentially damaging nearby sensitive plants or pollinating insects. The other way that pesticides can move in the environment is in the soil and water in the form of runoff and leaching. Runoff is the horizontal movement via drains, streams, ponds, and other surface waters. Leaching is the vertical, downward movement through the soil. Particles that drift may accidentally contaminate surface or groundwater. Indoor pesticide users should be cautious of pesticide-containing water going down the drain. Dumping pesticide or pesticide rinsate down the drain or toilet can contaminate water or even the wastewater treatment facility. Protected species. Most species of vertebrates are protected by law in North Carolina, such as deer, moles, geese, and others. It is illegal to control them by the use of pesticides. North Carolina Wildlife Commission does have a mole rule regarding controlling moles with pesticides. There are certain limitations, stipulations, and restrictions. Please contact the North Carolina Wildlife Commission for more information. Be familiar with species of animals on the protected list before you use a pesticide to control certain vertebrates. The Endangered Species Act, or ESA, protects endangered species and their habitats from adverse effects of pesticides. Labels are continually changing to comply with the ESA. You must read the label and be aware of these changes. Some of these changes may include a point system that must be met to apply the pesticide. These labels may be very specific, detailed, and comprehensive with ESA-related requirements. The first step in determining if a pesticide has special requirements associated with endangered species is to read the entire pesticide label. While reading the label, take note of the Endangered Species Protection Requirements section, if present. This section will direct you to the appropriate website to see if your application site falls within an endangered species bulletin area. You will need to enter the product you wish to apply, where, and when. The bulletins are specific for the product, location, and date of application. However, the bulletins are not specific as to the actual endangered species that may be found in the application area. They do not say which endangered species may be found in the area. The bulletin search should be done no more than 6 months prior to the planned pesticide application. The bulletins must be adhered to as they are enforceable under the law. If there is no restriction, print the bulletin and adhere to the bulletin's directions before going forward with the application. If there is a restriction, see if you can use a different product or apply it at a different time. Keep the bulletin as part of your application records. For bulletins live too, simply go to www.epa.gov/ESPP. This website will be listed on the pesticide label. A resource page for North Carolina applicators currently being set up and will be found by visiting the NCDA&CS pesticide section's ESA website listed on the screen, or by scanning the QR code on your mobile device to reach the EPA's ESA website. As a steward of the environment, you must be aware of the ESA-related pesticide label changes, and the best way to be aware of these changes is to read the entire label. Have you heard of FieldWatch, and did you know that North Carolina has been a partner member of FieldWatch for many years? FieldWatch is an online registry and communication system for the protection of sensitive sites such as specialty crops and beehives. It enables crop producers, beekeepers, and pesticide applicators to work together to protect specialty crops and beehives through use of their online mapping tools. FieldWatch is easy, reliable, and free to use. It is also voluntary to use unless required by pesticide label directions. There are 3 components of FieldWatch. The first component is called BeeCheck. BeeCheck is for beekeepers to map their apiary locations, allowing pesticide applicators to be aware of the presence of managed pollinators in the area. There is not a minimum or maximum amount of hives required to use the system. Anyone from a hobbyist beekeeper to a large commercial operation can register and map their beehive locations. The second component is called DriftWatch. DriftWatch is for growers of crops to map their field locations, allowing pesticide applicators to be aware of the presence of sensitive crops in the area. There is a minimum requirement of 1/2 an acre. The third component of FieldWatch is called FieldCheck. FieldCheck is for licensed pesticide applicators to view, access information, and become aware of the beehives mapped in BeeCheck and the sensitive crops mapped in DriftWatch. All licensees/certified applicators in North Carolina can register and use this service for free. To register or to learn more, visit the website listed on the screen or scan the QR code with your mobile device.
When it comes to pesticide safety, hazard or risk is determined by the toxicity of the pesticide, plus the duration or amount of exposure. Studies have shown that the most risk occurs in the mixing and loading phase, with applicators most often being exposed on their hands and forearms. Read your label and wear the PPE to minimize your risk of exposure. So, what are the differences of acute versus chronic toxicity? Acute toxicity is a single, one-time exposure event. Products bearing the signal words danger or danger poison are acutely toxic, meaning just one exposure can be severely harmful or fatal to humans. Chronic toxicity is the long-term, cumulative effects of many exposures over the span of time. Even products bearing the signal words caution or warning can be very harmful to humans if PPE is not worn. Remember from the previous slide that your hazard is a combination of toxicity and exposure. Pesticide with the signal word caution can also be toxic if the exposure amount is high. There are 4 primary routes of pesticide exposure: respiratory, dermal, oral, and eye. Respiratory exposure involves pesticide being inhaled into the respiratory system. Dermal exposure involves pesticide being absorbed through the skin. This type of exposure is most likely to occur with emulsifiable concentrate formulations when mixing and loading or cleaning equipment. Oral exposure involves pesticide being ingested by mouth. Improper pesticide storage, such as placing pesticides into food, feed, or beverage containers, contribute to this type of exposure. And finally, eye exposure. Some products can cause severe irritation or even permanent damage to the eye. For this reason, protective eyewear may be required. PPE. As a handler or applicator of pesticides, it's very important to be aware of symptoms and signs of pesticide exposure. A symptom is a problem that only the person experiencing it can feel. For example, if you begin to experience a headache or nausea, that is a symptom. A sign, on the other hand, is an outward clue that others can see. For example, you or the person you are working with shows signs of pesticide exposure if they were to vomit, develop sudden weakness, show confusion or unconsciousness. Organophosphate and carbamate insecticides can cause a range of signs and symptoms in humans, ranging from mild fatigue, headache, dizziness, blurred vision, excessive sweating, salivation, nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps, diarrhea, to moderate the inability to walk, weakness, chest pain, constricted pupils, to severe fainting, muscle twitching, running nose, drooling, breathing difficulty, and coma. You should also be aware of the issues that can mimic signs and symptoms of pesticide exposure. For example, heat stress or heat stroke can look and feel like pesticide exposure. You should always seek medical attention immediately when dealing with these signs and symptoms. Every pesticide label will have a section called First Aid or Statement of Practical Treatment. In the First Aid section, you can find information about what to do in the event of an oral, inhalation, dermal, or ocular exposure. This is only for first response. Be sure to seek and follow treatment advice if necessary.
When it comes to pesticide safety, personal protective equipment, or PPE, may consist of numerous items. All PPE is designed to be worn to protect the human body from contact with pesticides. PPE varies in its level of protection depending on the material that it is made from. All pesticide handlers are legally required to follow the PPE instructions that are on pesticide labels. The label will list the minimum PPE requirements. These items are required for your protection. You can always wear additional PPE, but you must at least wear the minimum. If you are using 2 or more pesticides together, follow the label with the highest level of PPE. The PPE statement on the label will look something like this. The words, applicators and handlers must wear, will be followed by the required PPE that must be worn. Not only is this mandatory label language, but wearing the appropriate PPE will help protect you from acute and chronic pesticide exposures. The section titled Precautionary Statements will have a variety of important information, from the required PPE to safety requirements, engineering controls, user safety recommendations, environmental hazards, and physical or chemical hazards. Sometimes the required PPE may be surprising. For example, the product seen here requires long-sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes plus socks, and waterproof gloves. There are more requirements added based on environment to be worked in. As we said earlier, PPE varies in its level of protection. It is extremely important to wear the recommended PPE or higher because not all materials offer the same level of protection. Here you can see that cloth clothing is the least protective, and a chemical-resistant suit is the most protective. Between those extremes, you have water-resistant and waterproof. While cotton-based cloth clothing will allow moisture to reach the skin, waterproof material will not. While a waterproof suit will keep water out, it may permit chemicals in. The label required PPE is determined based on the concentration, formulation, and toxicity of the active ingredient. Since cloth tends to absorb and retain moisture, including that moisture that comes from pesticide droplets and mixtures, cotton, denim, and leather are not recommended for most applications. However, some products, such as grain fumigants, do require cotton gloves. Always consider the potential for dermal exposure in something like a cloth hat that is worn each day, or leather gloves that routinely contact your sprayer. Items made of these materials, that are used each day, are likely to retain pesticide residues and expose them to your skin.
PPE is susceptible to degradation. That's why it's important to inspect your PPE before each use. Make sure that there is no physical damage such as rips, holes, or tears. With articles such as respirators, you should check expiration dates and usage limits. Prolonged exposure to sunlight, wind, and temperature extremes will accelerate wear and tear. Look for signs of environmental deterioration. Likewise, PPE that has been exposed to certain chemicals may break down more quickly or chemically deteriorate. If you see any signs that your PPE is compromised, discard the article and obtain new PPE. If your pesticide label requires the use of a respirator, be aware that there are certain associated OSHA requirements to be met. For one thing, respirators put extra strain on your heart and lungs. Before you wear a respirator in a field situation, you need to know that you are medically safe to wear one. So, first, you will need a medical evaluation and clearance. Once you have medical clearance, you need to be fit tested. This is the process of testing the respirator while it is on your face. The administrator will ensure that the fit is appropriate and that the respirator works as intended. Finally, annual training is required that reminds the user how to properly inspect, wear, and maintain a respirator. Transportation of pesticides. When it comes to transportation of pesticides, protecting your health and the environment is key. Pesticide containers inside the vehicle pose a risk to human health if they are released, and unsecured containers outside the vehicle have the potential to fall off and spill. Luckily, there are a few easy ways to make sure you can transport pesticides from point A to point B. Always secure your load. Use tie-down straps if needed to make sure that containers are not sliding around. Lockable job boxes are a great way to keep your equipment safe and secure as long as it's stored right. Safe transport depends on you, the user. When transporting pesticides, never carry pesticides in the passenger section of the vehicle or allow anyone to ride in this section with pesticides. The reason for this is that if people and pesticides are together and there is a traffic incident, the contents of the containers could be released onto the human occupants. This is an entirely avoidable exposure event. Never store or transport your pesticides in the same area as food, clothing, or other items meant for human or animal consumption. Once again, the potential for cross-contamination is real and avoidable. Finally, when you have arrived at your destination, ensure that pesticides are in a locked compartment, not unlocked or in the open. A freestanding pesticide container could easily be forgotten about on the bed or picked up by a passersby. When it comes to pesticide safety, accidents happen. Pesticides and pesticide containers that have spilled, busted, crashed, and overturned are unfortunately a part of life. Pesticide-related accidents can affect wildlife, like honeybees, while fire and runoff can have devastating impacts of their own. While accidents can and do happen, there are ways to mitigate risks by planning and responding to accidents appropriately. The 3 C's of spill management are control, contain, and clean up. If you ever find yourself involved in a spill response, the first thing you should do is control the spill. That is, stop the source of the leak or spill, such as turning a valve, fixing an overturned container, or plugging a hole. Second, you will need to contain the spill. Prevent the spilled substance from spreading further, often by creating a barrier with absorbent materials like soil, sand, or pads to confine it to a small area and keep it out of drains or waterways. Third, clean up and safely remove all contaminated materials, including absorbents, and dispose of them according to regulations, ensuring the area is thoroughly cleaned and decontaminated. The contaminated soil can often be used on a labeled site. Reach out to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services for reporting and guidance on pesticide spills. When handling a spill, you should always wear the appropriate PPE to protect yourself from pesticide exposure. Appropriate spill control is required to be on service vehicles and available to you when necessary.
Spills into waterways pose an elevated risk of human and environmental harm. If a spill occurs in a waterway, immediately contact the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality at 1-800-858-0368 or the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Structural Pest Control Section during business hours at 1-984-236-4575. It is not a violation of the North Carolina Structural Pest Control Law to have an accidental spill. However, it is a violation to spill a pesticide into the waters of the state and fail to report it.
The potential for exposure is highest during the mixing and loading phase of the pesticide operation. Why? Well, you'll be working with a concentrated product where you are pouring pesticides from one vessel to another, and there is often running water nearby. Given this situation, it is extremely important to take all precautions. Wear the appropriate PPE, select a well-ventilated and well-lit area, protect water sources from backflow and runoff, use a containment pad if possible, open packages carefully, measure with glass or plastic, not metal, and pay careful attention while transferring from one container to another. Lack of PPE, dim lighting, poor ventilation, poor water management, lack of attention, issues opening containers, and using reactive tools have historically all contributed to incidents in the mixing and loading zone. What if you have old, unwanted, or unusable pesticides? Or, once you have used the contents of the pesticide container, what do you do next? Regarding unused or unwanted pesticides, they should be disposed of at an approved pesticide disposal locations. For empty containers, discard the lid and label. Be sure to triple rinse and puncture the container. Apply any rinsate to a labeled site. A correctly prepared empty container can be discarded at a landfill or recycled at pesticide container recycling locations across the state. Always refer to the label for guidance. There are 3 categories of pesticide storage. First, there's general storage. Then there's commercial storage of any quantity of restricted use pesticides, or RUPs. And lastly, there's contingency storage. General storage is for all pesticides. Contingency storage is for large, commercial facilities that are storing 10,000 pounds or more of formulated RUPs at any given time. The North Carolina general storage requirements for general use pesticides are what we would typically call common sense safety requirements for all pesticides. What this means is that all containers should be free of leaks. The storage area should be uncluttered so as to facilitate inspection, and all containers should be labeled. Beyond this, no pesticide should ever be stored in a food, feed, beverage, or medicine container. Pesticides should not be stored in such a way as to contaminate food, feed, beverage, eating utensils, tobacco, seed, fertilizer, or other pesticides. In general, this means storing pesticides with pesticides and everything else stays outside of the pesticide storage. General use storage must prevent unauthorized access, lack combustibles or fire hazards, and the user must observe label recommendations, if any, such as temperature limitations or other storage restrictions.
The North Carolina storage requirements for restricted use pesticides when storing pesticides commercially are higher than those of general use. Restricted use pesticides must meet all the requirements of general use, and they must also be locked when unattended. There must be a warning sign with the required language. Absorptive material must also be on hand to contain any spills. You may not store RUP within 100 feet of a public water supply or 50 feet of a private water supply. You must make a pre-fire plan. You must request an annual inspection from the fire department. You must keep a current inventory available on location and another copy offsite and update every 30 days. And finally, you should exercise good communication between your facility and the local fire department. Another recent rule change involves the sale of restricted use pesticides. Licensed pesticide dealers record the license phases/categories of each person who purchases a restricted use pesticide. All pesticide applicators must ensure they have the correct category for each product they purchase and use. As mentioned earlier, look on the back of your pest control license to see the phases you currently hold.
Supervision of pesticide applicators is an area of the regulations that have been changed and updated recently. The following information is new and was not a part of your initial certification. A licensee/certified applicator is one who has passed the appropriate North Carolina structural exams and has maintained their certification since taking and passing the exam. A non-certified applicator is a registered technician who has not passed the structural exams, but has gone through the registered technician school. North Carolina allows licensees/certified applicators to supervise registered techs applying pesticides under their license if certain rules and conditions are met.
The registered technician must be at least 18 years old. There is no grandfather clause to this rule.
All registered technicians must have been trained within the last 12 months prior to the handling or applying of a pesticide. This is an annual training requirement. North Carolina's approved training for registered technicians can be found online on the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Structural Pest Control Section website. There is a 43-minute video which provides some basic pesticide handling and safety tips. It is meant to be a baseline reminder for those who are working under the supervision of a licensee/certified applicator. There is no grace period for the training, so be sure to train relevant personnel before they begin pesticide handling or making applications. The training is only available in English and is now an annual training requirement for registered technicians. The supervising applicator must have a complete record of training. This record of training must be kept for at least 2 years after employee's exit date. The approved training video and materials can be found on the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Structural Pest Control Section website. The template for record keeping is found on the website, next to the video, as well. It is required to print the record-keeping template so that registered technicians sign and date it after they've completed the training. Be sure to fill out the training record in its entirety. Inspectors with the Structural Pest Control section may request a copy of this training record. The supervising applicator must be able to provide the training record upon request. For training registered technicians, the supervising applicator must be qualified, present, and available to answer questions during the training. Qualified means that the supervising applicator is currently certified. The supervising applicator must be available and present during the entire training to answer any questions that arise. Remember, as the supervising applicator, it is your responsibility to be available to your registered technicians and give them opportunities to ask any questions that they may have. If employees reside over 75 miles from a licensee's home address, the licensee is required to submit for approval a supervision plan with the Structural Pest Control section. The information must show that he or she is, in fact, controlling, directing, and supervising the structural pest control activities of their office or employees. The supervising applicator must be licensed and certified in each category in which the treatment is made by the registered technician. For example, if the certified applicator is certified in just P and F phase, the registered tech could make applications in those phases, but not W phase insect work. Similarly, if the certified applicator is certified in P phase, but they report to be supervising an applicator who is controlling termites, that would violate the supervision rules of the North Carolina Structural Pest Control Regulations. The registered technician must have access to the product label at all times during the handling and use of the pesticide. As we have stated, not only is the label the law, but it also has essential information for the correct and safe use of pesticide. The registered technician should have full access to the product label in order to reference things like PPE, directions for use, and first aid. In the event of an emergency, the non-certified applicator would need the pesticide label to provide to a medical professional.
The supervising applicator must instruct and guide the registered technician on the safe operation and proper use of equipment used for handling and applying pesticides. Before a registered technician uses any application equipment, the supervising applicator must ensure the registered technician knows how to use, maintain, and operate the equipment. The registered tech must have the means to immediately communicate with the supervising applicator. This is typically by phone. It is possible that the supervising applicator could be many miles away. What is required is that the registered tech can reach the supervising applicator at a moment's notice for questions, and the supervising applicator must be able to respond to any emergency.
The registered tech must be provided with instructions in a manner that they can understand. A language barrier is no excuse for not providing instructions. The instructions must be specific to both the site conditions and the pesticide being used. In this example, the house is located next to a body of water with the grade sloping toward it. Because of that, you might instruct the registered technician that a bait application would be the more appropriate choice to reduce the risk of runoff or contamination. If a perimeter treatment is still selected, the technician should first assess soil compaction and take extra care to prevent any pesticide from reaching the water. And hopefully, rain is not in the forecast.
The first condition in which a certified applicator would not be able to supervise a registered technician is when the label prohibits it. Some labels, in the restrictions for use section, will read, "Not to be used by uncertified applicators working under the supervision of a certified applicator." These products are only to be handled and applied by licensees or certified applicators, nobody else. An example of this on a label can be seen on this slide. The supervising applicator must ensure that before each day of use, whether through training or daily inspections, all equipment used for handling and application of pesticides by the registered tech must be in proper operating condition. They should make sure that the registered tech has equipment that is reasonably free of defects and malfunction. Functionality includes calibration,
and an uncalibrated or poorly calibrated sprayer poses unnecessary hazards to people and the environment. Therefore, the supervising applicator should ensure the equipment is routinely calibrated by the registered technician. The registered tech should immediately communicate any issues or concerns to the supervising applicator, such as leaking or malfunctioning equipment.
The supervising applicator is required to provide any registered technician with the label required PPE, which must be in proper condition and clean. It must also be worn by the registered tech and used correctly. Congratulations, you have just completed the required North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Structural Pest Control Certification and Training Standards Update training. To receive credit for completion of this training, please follow the instructions on the last slide of this presentation. Warning: you must complete the final steps on the last slide to receive credit and finalize this training. For more information, visit our website shown on the screen or by scanning the QR code with your mobile device. You can also reach us by phone at 98423645575. To complete and receive credit for this training, go back to the website where this training video is located. Click on the link found below this training called NCDA&CS Required C&T Standards Update Training Form Submission. After clicking on the link, fill out the entire form and check the attestation box certifying you completed the training. Click Submit. You should receive an automated verification email with a personalized certificate to keep for your records. If you have any questions about verifying the completion of this training, please contact the Structural Pest Control Section Office at 98423645575. Again, the phone number is 98423645575. Thank you for completing the NCDA&CS Required Certification and Training Standards Update training.